So, hi Trish, thanks for coming on. Um, Now, a lot of people think about the cashless society and they think of the government and the government control and things that they can do, tell them what to buy, possibly, stop them buying things. But your story is very different. It's more, it's probably something a lot of people don't think about. Would you like to start and tell us a wee bit about you and how it all began?
Absolutely, yeah. I got married when I was 21, very young, a bit naive, and basically soon discovered that the person that I was married to was very controlling and very abusive. And to cut a long story short, I stayed in the marriage for 10 years and went through cycles of counselling, and things would get better again and then they would get worse again. And eventually in 2018, I made the decision to leave. I had left once before in 2013, only for a week, and then I came back with promises that things would get better and that the behaviour would stop. But obviously, things went back to the abusive patterns again. And in 2018, my son had just turned 2, and I was 10 weeks pregnant with my daughter. And the abuse had been ongoing throughout the whole marriage, but I had become increasingly aware that things weren't going to change,
Hmm.
and that this is the way this person was going to treat me, and that my kids were going to grow up in that environment unless I left. So I made the decision at, I think it was the start of October um, 2018, to leave. And I was going to leave in secret because I didn't know what he would do if he found out that we were going to leave. I didn't know if he would try to force us to stay, if he would try to hurt us, if he would try to
Hmm.
hurt himself. So it was a very anxious time for me. I already had morning sickness with the baby. I was trying to manage the 2-year-old, and I was
Right.
just trying
Sorry,
to find a
because you
time to
mentioned
leave.
before you left when you're 10 weeks pregnant, didn't you? So it's
Yeah.
obviously a very stressful time for you.
Yeah, it was really stressful. And the day I left, it was a Tuesday, and I hadn't been able to keep food down since the Friday before. Like I was just vomiting everything up again, and it was probably partly to do with the baby, but also partly to do with fear of, I was terrified that he was going to find out what I was
Hmm.
planning. I was like sending WhatsApp messages to my friends and family about how I was going to get out safely. And every time I sent a message, I was deleting it in case he found it on my phone or something. So it was a very nerve wracking few days from
Yeah.
knowing that I was going to go to actually getting away. But yeah, so finally got away then on the 9th of October 2018, and I went to live with my mum then, and stayed there. So yeah, that was the sort of the short
Hmm.
version of me leaving. But yeah, when it comes to cash, I think that was quite a big thing in my case, because we only had one account. We had one joint account throughout the marriage. That was something that he had insisted on from before we married. He said we're not allowed to have our own separate accounts. We just have one joint account. Everything's ours. Um, he was very against me having any financial independence.
Hmm.
And as a 21-year-old, I was just young and stupid, and just went along with that.
Yeah.
So we had the one account. We also had a savings account that was in his name only. And we had a credit card that obviously was in his name and not mine. So he had access to those two funds, which I had nothing to do with. Um, so when it came to leaving, although I still had access to our joint account, it wasn't long before he emptied that account out. And I think he kept it he maybe kept it topped up with like £50 at a
Yeah.
time, just to
Do you,
limit the amount of money
do you
I had
think he
access.
knew that you were planning leaving, or possibly is? Do you think that's why he was doing that, or do you think it was just more of a control thing, or?
He had been financially controlling from the start, in terms of making sure we only had the one account. I wasn't allowed a credit card. I had to account for every penny that I spent. I got paid in cash from the job that I had, and I had to tell him every week how much money I got and how much I had deposited in the bank. And if I had kept any back, why had I kept that? How much had I kept? So I was used to being financially controlled by him anyway. But I suppose I had confronted him in September, a few weeks before I actually left, and said, you're controlling. This isn't a good way to treat somebody. You have to sort yourself out. And if you don't change, I don't know if I said I was going to leave, but I think I said that you have to change. I'm not going to continue to live like this. So I don't think he was shocked that I went in the end. But yeah, so he could have been planning that. He got the money out of there very quickly. He set up a different account for himself very, very quickly. So maybe he did have some sort of foresight there.
Mm-hmm. So when did you think you're going to start saving cash? How did that go about if he was taking money out of the account and he was only leaving so much in? And how did you go about that?
Yeah, well, it had been my birthday in September, thankfully. So I had already realised that there was something really badly wrong, that sort of at the start of September. And that's when I was sort of on high alert. And then my birthday came about and I got some cash from family for that. So I just kept that stowed away. And really that was it. I only really had a very little bit of cash whenever I actually left, probably only 50 quid or so. And that was okay for me because I was staying with my mum. If I had been going to leave and stay in a hotel or a hostel or somewhere, it would have been much harder financially to do that. But it was more actually after I left and before I was able to get a bank account set up and before I had any sort of access to money or benefits coming in is when I really relied on cash the most. So there was a period of a few weeks after I left where it was taking a while to get a bank account set up. But more than that, it was taking time to get the benefits for the kids and everything taken from the joint account that we had and set into my personal account that I just set up. So there was probably a time lapse of about 3 or 4 weeks. And it was during that time that I really relied on cash. And it was mostly from family members and friends who just wanted to help me. And even though I was staying at my mum's house, I still had expenses. I still had to buy shoes for my son. He was only 2 at the time, but he was growing out of his shoes. He needed new ones. I was also going to counselling to try and get my head around what was going on. So I had to pay for taxi journeys up and down to counselling and for counselling sessions, just even to help me just to process what I was going through. And I very much relied on cash. I had this little stash of money in the wardrobe in my mum's house, and I would keep very careful track of how much I had and how much was left. And it was a real lifeline for me. And having been controlled financially for so long, even having control myself over that small amount of money was very empowering, even in those early days.
Yeah. Did you try approaching any, just say, charities or anything like Citizens Advice or anything like that? Did they try help you in any way, or is it just a case of you worked your own way to get out of that situation and just,
Well, actually, I after I left on the Tuesday, and that same week I went to Women's Aid. They had a sort of one-stop shop for advice. So they had a solicitor and someone who would advise you with housing, and then a benefits person, all sort of in the one place that you can come and get advice from. So I joined up with that, and then I actually got ongoing support from Women's Aid for the next 2 years. And they were fantastic in terms of supporting me, and there were so many ways in which they supported me, but financially was one of them. I think there was one Christmas that Celtic football team had donated a large amount of money to Women's Aid, and out of that money I got £100 for me and the kids for Christmas.
That's good.
So yeah, I've never been a massive Celtic fan, but I really appreciated that.
I'll not say really too much.
It's a really nice gesture. It was really lovely and really heartwarming, and definitely was a massive practical help for that Christmas. And then also just things like food vouchers and lots of toiletries when my baby was born. So Women's Aid were a great support that way. They helped me to get into my own house, which I'm in now. And yeah, that was the main source of support that I had in that time.
Yeah. So the way you see things going now, obviously, Rishi Sunak's been announcing CBDC currencies, and the way we're heading. Basically, do you sort of see all that and you think, well, here we go again? I've just got out of this situation literally not very long ago, probably not far off the start of the pandemic, really, and then here we are again. Does that concern you?
Absolutely. The way in which the government has been overstepping and controlling the people over the last 2 years has really been quite triggering in a way. The control I experienced was intimate partner abuse, but there are similar traits in what the government has been doing to all of us over the last couple of years in terms of gaslighting, in terms of curtailing our freedoms, in terms of arbitrary punishments for non-compliance. And those sorts of things are really, really disturbing to see. And it was one of the major things that sort of made me wake up to what was going on with COVID, was the way the messaging from the media and from the government in terms of vaccine take-up was becoming increasingly manipulative and coercive. And that just rang alarm bells for me, because I was very used to that sort of gaslighting, and having it done to the people by a government is just unforgivable, really. And then with it being perpetuated even in financial terms of the cashless society that's coming in, and we're seeing increasing numbers of businesses that are refusing to take cash, and the sense of lack of privacy and lack of freedom that brings with it is very disturbing.
Yeah. So was it the actual vaccines? It's funny, because that's what I was going to ask you. Do you see parallels between the way your ex acted and the government is acting now in terms
Absolutely.
of, yeah. So
absolutely, 100%. It's the coercion, it's the telling, it's the twisting of the truth. It's the emotional pressure and abuse, using those sort of emotive language of, you're going to kill your granny if you don't get this vaccine. People are being selfish, they're disrespecting the NHS, all that sort of emotional mind games. It's very warped, and I think it really made me feel like, well, this isn't for our good. Nobody who is trying to encourage you to take something for your good resorts to those sorts of manipulative tactics. It's not necessary. If it's for your own good, you don't need to be coerced, and you don't need to be pressured. So that's where the major alarm bells were ringing for me.
Did you see anything before that in the terms of like lockdowns, you must stay at home, it's for your benefit type of thing, not just the vaccine? Did you see anything before that you started thinking, well, there's something not right here, or,
Yeah, it just didn't make sense. It didn't, I could understand at the start that there might be a sense of the fear of the unknown, but the longer that it went on, and the lack of advice in terms of general health and well-being, and the lockdowns in terms of you must not leave your house for more than 1 hour a day, and locking up children's play parks, not allowing people to sit on park benches, the things that people really need, in order to just get through, the simple things that people need to stay well. And these are the people who knew what the cost of lockdown would be in terms of emotional, mental health, self-harm, domestic abuse as well. They knew that they were locking women in with their abusers. They knew that they were locking children in with their abusers, and they did it anyway. And I mean, I think looking back on that, even in terms of, it didn't happen here in Northern Ireland, but I think I remember seeing in Wales that in parts of supermarkets, like they cordoned off the aisles that were deemed to be non-essential.
That's right. Yeah. I forgot.
They had people
totally
checking trolleys.
That, yeah.
It's absolutely bizarre looking back on it now that people actually tolerated that. But such was the level of fear that had been generated through the media and through the government that there weren't riots over this sort of nonsense. People complied with it because people were absolutely terrified. And I think what the media had done was basically give people the impression that you're likely to get COVID if you don't do what we say. and if you get COVID, you're probably going to end up on a ventilator and you'll probably die.
Yeah.
That was the sort of messaging that was coming across, and I think that's how they achieved that level of compliance to farcical rules, just arbitrary, cruel, ridiculous things, so yeah.
I mean, going back to cash as well, there's also elderly people who have been using cash their whole lives, and that's almost how they function, isn't it? Because
absolutely.
We've all visited our granny and things where they give us a wee couple of pound, or there's they've got their big bottles full of whatever and change, and they do just tend to use cash a lot more. And it must have been a bit sort of alien to them in certain places, where they weren't allowed to use cash, and it's just it's just crazy, isn't it? But that's the way they want us to go, isn't it? So
it is. And also, I don't know if you've heard of an organisation called Christians Against Poverty, but
I have heard of them,
yeah, they I haven't done their course, but I know that they work with a lot of different churches in the area, and their whole premise of debt management and control is about using cash, because using cash gives people so much more control over what they spend. People are much less likely to get in debt if they use cash. They're much more likely to be controlled in what they're spending and spend only what they need, and be able to save well if they're using cash. But it's a good thing to use cash, and cash has served us well over the years. But obviously, it's not as easy to track. It's not as easy to control people if people have cash, and if we continue to use cash, it takes away a little bit more of that control from the government. So I can see why they don't want us to use it, but I'm really convinced that this is a time where we need to continue to use cash wherever possible, and especially in circumstances where our freedoms are being curtailed like that, to insist on having the right to use cash is very important. And it's the most vulnerable members of society that get hit the hardest when we go cashless. Like even the homeless people, they rely on cash that people give them in order to buy their meals, in order to put a roof over their heads at night. So it's the vulnerable that are hit hardest in these sort of measures. Yeah,
I mean, it's funny you mentioned homeless people there. That's it's another thing people don't really think about. I think a lot of people, when they think of cashless society, they think it's automatically government control. But there's lots of people that lose out, even if it wasn't about control. It's just, as I mentioned, elderly people there, people who are abused and controlled, like yourself, or homeless people, and it's just the list is actually quite endless when you really think of it. And that's why I want to get you on, just because it is something that people don't think about, and it is something that people should be aware of. And there'll be loads of people up and down the country that are probably doing the same thing. And, very shortly, probably sooner than we think, that will be taken away from them. Yeah.
100%. And it's become so convenient for people. Like, people don't even use cards to pay anymore. People are using their phone to pay. And I can see the convenience of it. I see the handiness of it. But I think what we really need to think about is that if we do go cashless, vulnerable people will be hit hard. And is that a sort of society we want? Do we want every transaction to be able to be traced? Do we want people to have to account for every penny that they spend? Do we want the government to be able to say, no, you've spent too much money on fast food this week, you're not allowed to spend anymore? Is that what we want?
Like the Chinese style social credit system.
Absolutely. And we need to resist this in whatever way we can, in using peaceful means, but continuing to use cash and insisting on using cash is one small way that we can do that. I actually work for a domestic abuse charity at the minute, and funnily enough, I've ended up in their finance department, and I manage their petty cash. And I can see how all the refuges in our area and all the outreach workers rely on cash on a daily basis to help people in need, to help domestic abuse victims and their children, just to get their necessities and essentials. Every single day, there are hundreds and hundreds of pounds coming in and out through petty cash. And that's vital. That is vital life-saving work. So the need is great, and that cash needs to continue to flow. It's not going to work the same way if it's all controlled and it's on cards. There's not going to be that access or that ease of access for people, and that sense of freedom.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even just about the whole control aspect. You see, lately there's been lots of cyber attacks, and well, they're blaming them all on Russia and things like that. What's to stop a cyber attack or power outage or things like that, and then all of a sudden you can't access your money? So it's not just about power, is it? It's not just about control. It could be things like that that could really be your undoing, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if all your eggs are in the one basket that way, then you're very vulnerable in that sense. And I don't know. There's so many ways in which money can be stolen from you today that aren't just physical anymore. There's so many ways of fraud and cybercrime that, I mean, I think being able to have access to cash is just vital in so many ways, not just in terms of government control, but in terms of having access to money, having access to resources, without relying on that digital transaction all the time.
Yeah. Have you thought about if we do go cashless and how there may be other ways of going into it? I don't know how much you've thought about this. I don't know how much you've looked into it. So I'll just ask anyway. But like things like Bitcoin and, non-centralized currencies. Have you looked into anything like that? Or?
I have a friend who has invested a bit in Bitcoin, and apparently, the worth of the value of Bitcoin is just going up and up and up. It's just sort of beyond my. I'm not really that tech savvy, so it's not something I've looked a lot at. I've been speaking to other people who are starting to invest in precious metals and things like that, and people who are starting to look at other ways in which they can invest their money in property or in different avenues, so that it's not all in their bank and vulnerable to being seized or stolen or taken in some other means. So there's definitely different options out there for people, but it's not something that I'm clued in on myself.
Yeah, it's something that's actually, I've seen a lot of discussions over Twitter and things like that, and they're talking about Bitcoin and XRP, I think it's called, and other currencies, and Bitcoin's not the way forward, this is the way forward, and all this. And I read some of the comments about blockchain and things like that, and I just think this is just way over my head. If you have not really read up on it, it's just it's alien to me. So no, I just thought
how there could be security there either. I mean, if it's all digital current, I don't know how that's protected, but definitely something that'd be interesting to look into. But I'm just not quite there myself.
That is the argument I keep having with people. I keep saying, well, if it's digital, it's hackable, it's controllable, it's
what's it just being erased, at the click of a switch,
I mean, who's to say you've got X amount of Bitcoin, just for example, and then the government just decides, we're taking control of everything and this is it. It's just, people say to me, it's not, this is where I lose track, because they say that it's not centralized. They can't do that. And, I'm going to get someone on to speak about it and get a better idea of it. Because I do think a lot of people don't understand actually how it all works, and it'd be good to get a proper insight to it anyway.
I'll look out for that episode. So
so probably just finishing off then, with your experience and what you're doing now, forget the whole digital thing coming in. How would you help other women or other people in your situation? What advice would you give to them?
My advice would be to have a plan of escape. If you have decided that you're going to go, then plan for a safe time to get away. Plan when the perpetrator is going to be away, that you've got enough time to get what you need together. If you're starting to hide stuff before you go, be careful that you're not hiding it somewhere that it can be found, and possibly start to move important stuff to your family's house, like passports, really important documents. Whenever I left, I thought naively that my husband would change, and that we'd be back together and it would all be okay. And I thought that it was just going to be a temporary thing. I was just leaving the house for a few months until he sorted himself out, and then I would be back. But I never got back into that house again after that night.
Yeah.
So I was never allowed to get anything. So take what you want to take then. If you can, prioritize things that are priceless, and prioritize documents that are going to be hard to replace. And it's a good idea to sort of have a wee stash of cash set aside if you can do so safely.
Would you give cash to maybe a trusted family member or a friend to hold on to it for you in case the situation arose?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having whatever support you can get, and it's probably safer to let somebody else hold on, like to move valuable things or cash to a friend or family member so that it's not going to be found. I think that can be a big risk if you're hiding things in the house. And if they're found before you go, then that can put you in a more dangerous situation. So I would say be safe first. Yeah. And don't wait if you need to get out. If it's not safe and you know you're in danger and you need to get out, don't wait until you can get those things. Just go. Just go. Even if you've only got the clothes on your back, you'll find people who can help you. There are charities out there that can help. It's not worth risking your life to get possessions. Just be safe. Make sure your kids are safe. Those are the most important things. And reach out for help. Women's Aid were fantastic for me. They know exactly what they're doing in these situations. There are charities as well for men who are victims of domestic abuse too. So yeah, seek support, reach out for support, and take the support. I think I really struggled, to be honest, to accept that I was a victim and to accept that I needed support and that I needed help. I really struggled with being the one who was always taking handouts, who needed lifts everywhere. And that was really hard for me, but it was only temporary. And when you get back on your feet, you can be the one that then helps other people as well. Yeah. So yes, support's vital.
So, sorry, just when you talked about Women's Aid and things like that there, can you visit them instead of them maybe phoning you? Because obviously earlier on you mentioned that you were having to delete messages and things like that. Can you go to them so there's no sort of trace, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. In terms of Women's Aid that I went to, I just turned up at their premises. A lot of them will have like a drop-in type thing on certain times, or if you make a phone call to them, you can get it referred. And yeah, I mean, they're very safe in how they do it as well. Like Women's Aid, whenever my outreach worker was phoning me, it would always be from a withheld number, and they would never leave a voicemail. So if I wasn't still in an abusive situation, so I was safe anyway. But there are a lot of women who still live with their abusers, and if they get a call from a withheld number, nobody can say, well, it's Women's Aid, it's withheld number, there's no message there. So they're very careful. They do everything they can to make sure women are safe. But yeah, there are ways that you can get in touch with them. They don't have to come to you can go to them. And more so with COVID as well, I think they're less likely to do house calls now. They're more likely to arrange with women to go to their premises or to see them on a neutral in a neutral venue.
Well, thank you very much, Trish, for coming on and just telling us your story, because I do think it's an important story. It's, as I said, it's something a lot of people don't think about. So thanks very much for coming on and giving your advice as well.
Thanks for having me. It was really nice to get chatting to you.
Yeah, thanks very much.
All right. All the best, Scott.
Thanks now, Trish. Bye.
Bye.